Today, we're catching up in the neighborhood with Katherine, a QHS MAC member whose life is as familiar and comforting as a walk down a tree-lined street. But what steps brought her to where she is today? Let's take a stroll through her life story and see what's been happening behind the scenes.
Hi, I'm Katherine, and I am here to tell a little bit about myself. I was born May 23rd, 1949. So I am known as the baby boomer generation. My parents were married in the 40s, and they were both born in the 20s. So they lived through a lot of difficult times when they were children. And I was born the second child in my family. I had a brother that was a bit older, almost 2 years older. And we had a small home in a nice little quaint city. After World War II, the veterans were allowed to buy a little bungalow home for $5,000. And that's where I lived for the first 10 years of my life. And those years were somewhat difficult. My mom was a nurse that worked part-time, and my dad had been trained to be a tool maker and then went on to work for a good, larger car company, Ford Motor Company. But those years were tough in the 50s. Some people think it was like a little fairy tale, but there were some difficult times with people just not having enough money to do a lot of things like vacations and such. So we made it what we needed to make it. We would go camping. We camped in a tent, and we traveled around in the city where I lived, in the state that I lived in, Michigan, and we traveled up north, and we traveled across the bridge into the Upper Peninsula, and we did a lot of wonderful camping, a lot of good family time. But my childhood wasn't always a happy time. My father came from a very strict family where he learned a lot of bad habits from his father, where the women in the family were sometimes not looked up to with the greatest pride. And my grandfather would belittle the women in the family, his daughters and his wife. And that's kind of what my dad kind of learned from his dad. So me, little Kathy, and my mom were somewhat, not as probably thought of as we should have been thought of as I was growing up. And my brother, though, he was like the king of the castle. So I made it through those times. But one of the bad things of my young childhood, they didn't know what it was, but I have Tourette's syndrome. And in those days, in the early days of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, they didn't know what Tourette's syndrome was. So I was somewhat, taken back by having to just deal with what that is. And if you don't know what that is, take the time to look it up and find out a little bit about it, because it's a neurological disorder that you're born with. And you have little tics of movement and such, and sounds that you make. And those were difficult times for me. But as my life progressed into my teenage years and into high school and college, the Tourette was very well controlled. I was able to actually have almost like a remission. So that was very good for me. And I had a wonderful time in high school and in college. But my mom suffered severely with depression. And that was a sad part of my life. All my life, she suffered with darkness around her. And I always tried to help her and be happy with helping my mom. And so I moved forward to into the 60s and graduating from high school and moving into college. And I met my first husband, and we married at a young age. At 21, we married. That was what to do, right? And I had some difficult times of trying to have a baby and getting pregnant, which was very hard for me, because when my mom was pregnant for me, she took a medicine that the doctors were recommending to women that they thought would miscarry their babies. It was called Stabestrol. What happened to those women, me being one of them, we have a lot of let's say, female problems, our female organs are very damaged, and it created in many women millions over the millions, many millions, that were called DES daughters. That's what we're called. I'm a DES daughter. And cancer was in our private areas, and many women died. You couldn't get pregnant, or you had a hard time getting pregnant. And even maybe if you were to have a baby, you might have a very early delivery, and maybe that child wouldn't survive. Well, it took me 13 years to get pregnant, and then I had that first baby that didn't make it. He lived for 2 days and he died. So I call myself as part of the agenda to not have women survive and have, let's call it a time to just hurt the women and not be able to have babies and be able to go forward with their lives. So I dealt with that all my life too. Then I was able to go forward and I did have a child, a wonderful daughter that was a miracle of all miracles. And then moving forward, that marriage did not last, and I moved into another type of marriage that was very loving and very caring, and that's with my Douglas. But what happened in that scenario, after 7 years of being married, he became very sick. I mean, really sick. And so for the last 24 years, I have been a caretaker to my Douglas because he became sick with several different heart diseases, congestive heart failure, AFib, and the lower chamber called VT. And that creates major problems in our life. And then his memory loss and different things. So basically, I've had almost 30 years of my life taken of being just a caretaker and doing my duty of what God's directed me to do and to help take care of Douglas. I found Quantum Healing System because I've known Cynthia for several years. I was part of her Cardin group for our future of helping humanity move forward and helping to heal the world with lots of things that we're going to do to help different organizations grow and be prosperous. I knew that with Cynthia's idea, I was going to help heal my Douglas. That was going to heal my Douglas. Then, because I am very connected to God and Jesus, very hear Jesus talking to me and knowing who he is, personal relationship with that respect, I knew I had heard from the heavens that something unique was going to happen to me, and that I was going to be able to become younger. I didn't really know how, but I think from our medical bed, our ARC, that was going to be happening. But I got confirmation from the heavens that I would become and be able to get pregnant again. But it would be my Ryan who died for me 45 years ago. His soul was telling me, my Ryan was telling me, that I would become pregnant with him again. That same soul was going to come back to me. He's waited 45 years in heaven. And a soul sister that I'm so connected to here in where I live has had very many confirmations from the heavens, and even from my Ryan herself has come to her to tell her that this is all true, and this is God created, and this is very true, and it is ordained and divine from the heavens. So I know I'm going to be very connected to making all of our lives better, creating the things that we're going to create with the projects we're going to move forward with, having a new birth with the same soul. And my purpose will be to move forward. I know I'm going to write a book, but I'm going to move forward with teaching and helping understand that our souls do and have a purpose, and that we live on and on in different lives. and that I'm going to be here to help teach and train people that our souls have choices. That's one of my main purposes now that I know where I'm headed with what we're going to be doing with part of our quantum healing system. So that's kind of my life in a nutshell. I've dealt with a lot and I love it all. I'm very positive. I'm very connected. I have a high energy and I keep my Douglas going every day with his high energy. And with that, we'll watch what happens to us all when we go through our complete changeover in our quantum healing arc. Thank you. God bless everybody.
Join us on the Prequel, where every story matters and every voice is heard. Because here at QHS, we're all about healing, learning, and growing together.